Welcome to 24 Chambers of Film. I'm Nathan, and today we're continuing the conversation of live-action movies that were adapted from video games. Today, we're talking Double Dragon.
Double Dragon. You said it.
This is probably the least popular video game adaptation from the first four games that were adapted into live-action movies from video games. Those include Super Mario, which we covered in the previous video. This is going to be Double Dragon. And then we're going to have Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. That is the chronological order that these movies are released in. And it's interesting because Double Dragon, out of all four of these, was probably the least popular, but I feel had the most potential that wasn't filled.
Watch your step.
Double Dragon had about a sixth of the budget that Super Mario had, which was its predecessor in this live-action video game adaptation into movies sequence that started in the early 90s. They actually were filming when Mario was released, and the director got to go see Mario in theaters while they were filming Double Dragon. And I think the key difference here is that Mario tried to take the video game and make it more adult.
A kidnapped princess.
Where Double Dragon tried to take the video game and make it more kid-friendly.
This half gives power over the body.
All right, so where's the on button?
And for me, that was their biggest flaw right there. So before we get into everything about the movie, for those not familiar with Double Dragon, it was a huge arcade video game when it came out in the late 80s, 1987. Was when the first one was released. It was a two-player game, side-scrolling, and it was basically the brothers Billy and Jimmy Lee, and they had to fight the Black Warriors gang in New York City, which was, at the time in the game, had no authority, no law. The Black Warriors had taken over the city, and Billy's girlfriend, Marion, gets abducted by them, so you set off on the game to save Marion. The game had definitely some darker tones. Even the cover art, if you look at it, made it look gritty, and it didn't have a fun, childish feel, I guess is the best way to put it. It actually had a darker tone, which, it's not like video games today where you have these amazing graphics that look realistic, but for the graphics that it did have, it definitely, the art and stuff presented a darker tone for it. Essentially in the game, the original game, this is, I think, where they ran into problems with the movies that by the time they started filming in 1992, there were more than, I think there were 3 or 4 Double Dragon games. And I guess they had a little bit to pick up from each one. Not only was there arcade versions, there was the ports to the NES, and then they ended up being very different. So in the original arcade version, Billy and Jimmy fight their way to save Marion, and Marion is Billy's girlfriend. But oddly enough, at the end of it, she says, "Fight for me, and the winner of you two gets me," which is completely weird. But that only happens if both players make it to the end of the game. If only one player makes it, then Marion goes with that one. Either way, kind of weird. She's dating Billy, but if they both save her, she basically makes him fight for her affection. Not sure what was up with that or that decision. I believe in the NES port, they made it so that Jimmy ends up being the actual leader of the Black Warriors gang, and he's the one who orchestrated the abduction of her because he was jealous. So what's even crazier is in the sequel, it starts off and the Black Warriors are still around, and they get revenge on Billy and Jimmy Lee by killing Marion right at the start of the game. And that did not happen in the ports to the NES version. So the arcade, to me, really should have been the foundation for this movie, because that was what made it a hit. It started off on the arcades, and they should have stuck with that. Now, this film, as I mentioned, had a smaller budget. It was done by a smaller team that, I guess, saw an opportunity to get into the video game to live action movie space and potentially make a name for themselves. The man with the idea behind this was Alan Schechter, and he, along with the Shaw brothers, Sunil and Ash, went in to produce this movie. The Shaw brothers were the money, and Schechter was basically the guy with the plan. And from everything that I have read, and unlike Mario, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, there isn't too much information about the production on here. Mario was notorious for production issues. The other movies were well documented when it came to all the production stuff, but there isn't a lot on Double Dragon. Like I said, I think at the time, no one saw that as a big enough franchise, I guess, to pay that much attention to, but these guys had a vision, especially Schechter, and I think his vision was eventually crushed because Schechter wanted to make this movie dark, gritty, which essentially is what the game is. It's a dark and gritty video game when you think about the story behind it. And it's got that feel in the game, unlike Mario, where they wanted to make it dark and gritty because they thought the story itself wasn't a nice story. But when you play the video game, it's bright, it's colorful, definitely geared towards kids. And that was their fatal flaw. Whereas these guys here had that out in front of them. They had martial arts, real people. There wasn't going to be any crazy concepts that needed to be done in the sense of this could have been a straight martial arts adult geared flick. And I think Schechter, from everything I had read, and I actually saw listened to a very good interview with the director of the movie, James Yukich. I believe I'm pronouncing his last name right, Yukich. And he was actually brought on by Schechter because they used to work together. And he directed several music videos for some notable bands and groups, people like Michael Jackson, Def Leppard. And he was brought in to direct the movie. And he mentioned that Schechter really wanted to go that adult route, but he said that even he noted that he didn't think that was the right move, that they needed to gear towards kids. And the Shaw brothers thought the same thing. And I guess they were constantly butting heads about that part of the movie production, what way it should go. I'm going to link that interview in the description because it is a very good interview. You guys should definitely listen to it. I thought it was very insightful, and it really paints a great picture of how, everyone has concepts for one thing, and then sometimes you say, you know what, that didn't really work out how I expected, and it's all hindsight, right? At the end of the day, you should have gone left, but you went right, etc. So oddly enough, or interestingly enough, the screenplay was written by Peter Gould and Michael Davis. I guess there was several writers on the screenplay, but they were the two that were finally credited. Peter Gould went on to be a producer and writer for Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. So it's kind of crazy to think that he got started in Double Dragon and then worked on what I think is a masterpiece in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. So back to the issues at hand was their budget, right? They didn't have that big of a budget. It was, I believe, $7-8 million. And Schechter, who was from Ohio, wanted to do a lot of filming in Ohio. And they started filming in Ohio. Eventually, they halted the production in Ohio because it was getting so expensive to bring in the actors and the stuntmen and everyone over to Ohio. So they said, let's just move it back to LA to finish this off. So there was a break. They started, stopped, and then took a break, which I don't know how their timeline would have worked, but I believe it was filming in 1992, about the same time as Mario was filming. And when that happened, I don't know if at any point they were ever actually on pace to release before Mario, but it could have come out pretty close to the time Mario came out. If they maybe didn't take that break, and then there wasn't those long delays when it came to putting the entire project together.
You said it.
We don't really have to wear these, do we?
Now let's get into the cast. So you have Billy and Jimmy Lee, who in the game are twins. They are not twins in the movie. They're just brothers. Scott Wolf from Party of Five Fame played Billy. And Mark Dacascos, who a lot of people recognize as the chairman on Iron Chef, played Jimmy. Mark Dacascos was an actual martial artist, where Scott Wolf, as far as I'm aware, was not. So it's kind of weird that they decided to go that route where they cast one martial artist in one role and the other one is not. Not to mention that they look nothing alike. They're definitely not twins, and they don't look like brothers. But that was a casting they went with. All pretty young, up-and-coming cast. Alyssa Milano was cast as Marion. Everyone knows her from Who's the Boss, Charmed, pretty well-recognized name. And those were essentially the good guys in the movie. They also did add a new character who was essentially the guardian for Billy and Jimmy Lee, Julia Nixon, who played Satori. And in the movie, there's this medallion of two dragons that gives you power. And if combined together, you get like the ultimate power. And that was the concept of the movie, where the bad guy retrieves one half of the medallion and she has the other half because she was trying to keep them separate. And that's why he's going after them. It's not someone gets abducted like in the video game and they have to save her. So she was a made up person for this. And the main bad guy is Koga Shuko, and he's played by Robert Patrick from Terminator 2 fame. He was the main bad guy in Terminator 2, which was released at this time. And you'd think that this role, I don't want to say would be beneath him, but that he would be going for bigger roles because he did such an excellent job in Terminator 2. Everyone saw that movie. Everyone was like, holy crap, that guy, that's like the ultimate bad guy. And he has such a menacing look on his face. But in this movie, the guy looks like Vanilla Ice's brother. It just it's not what you normally think of Robert Patrick when you think of him as an actor, not the roles he normally plays. But to his credit, he did do a good job acting in this movie. He took that role and he made it he basically made it his own thing, and it worked very well. Again, it wasn't meant to be a dark movie, so it was more, I guess, cartoony looking, goofy in a way. I mean, he wasn't goofy as an actor, but character's look it just looked ridiculous, honestly, in my opinion. And then as far as video game villain, he was made up for the movie. As far as video game villains, you had his right-hand henchwoman, I guess, Linda Lash. She was in the movie. She was played by Christina Wagner. And then you had Boa Dobo, who was one of the level bosses in Double Dragon. He was played by Nils Allen Stewart. And then you had two other henchmen that were with Linda Lash and Koga the entire movie, who looked like twins, but they weren't really twins. And then you had a bunch of gangs that basically took over the city. As far as the plot goes, it's not set in New York. It is set in New Angeles, which is basically a renamed Los Angeles because it's left in shambles after a big earthquake destroys the city and there is no government assistance. So essentially, you have the cops and you have the gangs who run the city. The cops have a pact with the gang, and essentially the gangs rule the night and the cops rule the day. And when Koga Shugo decides to go after the second half of the medallion, they break that truce. Marion is leads a group of, I guess you can call them a gang, right? But they're really more of a counter movement, I guess would be the best way to put it. But basically, Marion leads them. They're called the Power Corps, and she's been trying to recruit Billy and Jimmy, but they're there to try to clean up the city and fight against the gangs because the police will not fight them at night, basically, or had made that truce with them. Her dad is actually the chief of police. And the movie, now let's get into what went wrong with the movie, right? As I mentioned previously, Yukich mentioned that Schechter really wanted to make it dark and gritty, but they were trying to go for a PG rating for this movie. They wanted to appeal to the younger kids because they thought if they went anything bigger than PG, they would nerf their sales of the movie. So the movie's pretty bright and colorful at times, but it's also has some darker elements. It just, the characters are so, I want to say, non-threatening.
Let's have some fun.
Right? That even though it's darker at times, like at night and stuff, it doesn't make it feel like you're in danger. It feels like you're watching something that was created for kids. And I think that was a huge, huge mistake. Schechter should have won this one. They should have gone with what Schechter wanted, which was make it dark, gritty. Could have made a great martial arts franchise if you made it more adult oriented, if you didn't make it so family friendly with cheesy jokes.
Who wants gum?
If they succeed, they're heroes.
And things like that. At one point, the guy, Boa Dobo, his character gets captured and mutated, and he looks like a Garbage Pail Kid. And it's so ridiculous. It looks so ridiculous that if you were taking the movie seriously at that time, you would stop taking it seriously the minute you saw Boa Dobo after he'd been mutated. Before that, the guy looked menacing. The guy could have been, he would have been the leader of a gang who was all roided out, and he was a guy you would fear. Bad dialogue, yes, 100%, but physically imposing and didn't look like a complete cartoon. And the minute you see them go that route, it's not going to be serious. It has some very cool effects, though. Robert Patrick, the villain, Koga, he turned into the shadow being and he moves around. And that was a pretty cool looking effect. I don't know how modern it was at the time, but it looked great. That looked phenomenal.
And a madman will stop at nothing to possess it.
You're gonna love this.
And the whole story between Jimmy and Billy, like it's sibling rivalry, but it's just so hokey the way that they do it. To their credit, though, I mean, I have to say it was I did not expect certain characters to basically get off in the movie. When they did really one character, their guardian, I did not think she was gonna, get killed, and they killed her off about a third of the way through the movie, and then now they want revenge. But again, it was done in such a manner that if that would have been an R-rated, just gritty martial arts movie, it would have just come out so better. It's insinuated that she got killed. They don't show it. And I'm going to beat a dead horse here. Like, seriously, I'm going to take a baseball bat and I'm just going to keep beating the horse over.
There he is, beating that dead horse. Get him!
It should have been adult-oriented, geared towards adults. The game is supposed to be the story, unlike the Mushroom Kingdom crap that they try to pull in Mario. This story definitely should have been geared toward adults. They could have done Double Dragon 1, Double Dragon 2, Double Dragon 3, like a lot of martial arts movies back in the day tend to go to the well several times. They could have done the exact same thing here. The casting of Scott Wolf, not the right casting, looks too clean, looks too pretty, as the I guess you could say he was the main guy, right? He was like the guy that they try to make the main focus in the movie. He just didn't fit that role. Mark Dacascos, I think, fit the role a little bit better. He just looked like he could, like he just had a little bit more grit to him. I think they could have left him and just replaced Scott Wolf. And again, nothing against Scott Wolf. I'm just thinking of how you make this thing a lot more adult oriented. Alyssa Milano, her characters look in the movie, her whole Power Corp group, just bright graffiti, just looked like didn't fit what this should have been, right? It didn't fit at all. And Koga, as the bad guy, Linda Lash did a good job. She just seemed like the HBIC. And that was a good job. But Robert Patrick's character could have been darker. Honestly, he shouldn't, as much as I like Robert Patrick, he should not have been the main bad guy in the movie. They should have made it like the game where they're battling a street gang. And if they're going to have a main boss that they want to alter it a little bit, like most movies do when they're doing a video game adaptation, they alter someone. If they wanted to have a main boss, they should have not made him the main character. They should have had the guy who ran the show, who was behind the scenes, that they maybe discover in the third act of the movie. Then they have the street level guy who is, in this case, could have been Bo Adobo, but they didn't make him all goofy once they mutated him. And they should have had him be the guy until then the true bad guy is revealed. And I feel like there was so many chances for some hard, gritty fighting martial arts scenes that could have been nice, bloody, just throwdowns. And they didn't do that. That really, to me, is the biggest blunder of why Double Dragon failed. They took a gamble. It's always a gamble when you're going to make a video game into a live action movie. They took an even bigger gamble because they took a game that was it was a successful game, don't get me wrong, but it was not as successful as Mario Brothers. It was not as successful as Street Fighter. It was not as successful as Mortal Kombat. So they took a risk, and Schechter seemed like he had his idea for the risk, and then he got shut down. And I think the moment they tried to make that for kids, they shot themselves in the foot. The fact that they were going for a PG rating and everything was geared around going for a PG rating, and then they ended up with a PG-13 rating, kind of went against what they were trying to do. It's like, why go for the PG rating? Because I guess at the time, and this was mentioned by Yukich in that interview, getting a PG-13 rating would keep a lot of people out of the movie theaters. And they were trying to get that PG rating, and they couldn't hit the PG rating. So it's PG-13, which honestly, it's a PG movie if you look at it from nowadays perspective. But at the time, it got hit with the PG-13. So they made something that Schechter didn't want to do, who was essentially, to me, the man behind the original vision, because he's the one who said, let's do this. And then they didn't even get what their goal was, which was try to get it to PG. So all that effort might as well have just gone the extra mile and deleted whatever you needed to get it to PG. if that was the goal, why you didn't make it adult orient. And also, this is what I thought weird. Jukic, he directed music videos and everything, and he had nothing to do with the music that was selected for the film. He said that in that interview, which, like, dude, you got a guy who's renowned in the movie or the music industry when it comes to this, and you don't let that guy throw his 2 cents into that? Like, what was going on there? So I think this movie's critical mistake was actually just not listening to the man who came up with the concept of we're going to make a live action film about this. Alan Schechter, I would love to have seen what Alan Schechter wanted to do. I thought this movie had potential from the story perspective because it's set, there isn't crazy moves, there isn't crazy superpowers. In the later Double Dragon games, you kind of get that, but the first one was just straight up side-scrolling, beat 'em up, throw down style. And I think that could have transcended to film very well. And we did not get that because they decided to go with this cheeky martial arts kid-style movie. And alas, that just left you with the corpse of Double Dragon. Movie lost, half of its budget, didn't recoup it at the box office, just didn't perform well, was critically panned, was panned by fans. I think it's pretty fair to say that it's almost on every list of worst video game movie adaptations. One thing I will say is that they did do their job. They wanted to make this for kids, and they did. This movie will entertain a 10-year-old, 100%. I watched it recently with my kids, and they were entertained by it. I mean, they didn't love it, but they were entertained. So they wanted to entertain the younger audience, and they definitely accomplished that. Bad move, 100%, but they accomplished it. So I guess they could take their hat off, take a bow, because they achieved their goal in that sense. But it was a wrong move. End of the day, flat out wrong move. One thing that is funny to note, though, it's like I feel like every video game movie, especially when it came to the first 4 that were made, Mario Brothers, Double Dragon, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, particularly the first 3 because they were by far the worst. Nowadays, when people look at them, I see a lot of comments of like, oh, this is a cult classic. It gets better. I just love it. And it's like, that's great. People love it now, but where the hell were those people when that movie came out? They were kids, and I think it's just nostalgia that plays into that factor because I have it too. I like the original Super Mario Brothers, the live action one, but I acknowledge the fact that they messed up on that movie. I like Double Dragon. I mean, again, I don't like it as much as Super Mario Brothers. I can watch it, but I know for sure they effed that one up for sure. That should have been R-rated. Again, martial arts. I said I was going to beat a horse dead.
Dead. Get it!
With that, and I have, but that's because it's frustrating because you knew they had the idea. Schechter had the idea, and they shut him down. That was the biggest mistake they made. So there you have it. That was a second film. Like the other ones I said, there wasn't as much information available. Lost at the box office, didn't recoup their money at the box office. And it just went down now as one of the worst video game adaptations from video game to live action. And it shouldn't have. I strongly believe it shouldn't have. There you have it. That's the second video game that was released as a live action movie. To me, had the greatest potential because it could have been it was a real dark horse. Not could have, it was a real dark horse going into this. It could have been something special, and they just fumbled it. Next, we're going to be talking about Street Fighter. And this one to me is very interesting because at this point you got 2 major flops. Street Fighter was the game of games when this movie was made. I mean, everyone had high hopes for this. Yeah, they got super moves and stuff like that. Fireballs. Not anything that I think was too difficult, too heavy of a lift. They could have pulled this off. But next video, we're going to go into why Street Fighter failed as a live action movie. And before anyone gets upset, I get it. There's people that love it. There's people that say, oh no, that movie's a classic. Now it's a cult classic. Great. It's a cult classic. Doesn't mean it didn't fail because people hated it. It got critically panned. The only difference there is that movie was a box office success, but it was bad. Let's just get down to it. And we'll go over that on the next video. I'm Nathan for 24 Chambers of Film. Appreciate you guys watching. And I appreciate if you guys smash a like on the video and if you guys subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our content. Have a good one.